Putin's worst fear is here. Mass protests erupt in Iran as Tehran regime on brink of collapse.
Iran's currency has fueled a third day of demonstrations.
Iran says it is seeking dialogue with protest leaders.
Now to protest in Iran, people taking to the streets in Tehran.
Tehran is falling. The streets of 21st century Iran are living in the Middle Ages. On one side, are people starved into submission, forced to work a full month just to buy 1 gram of gold. On the other side, a metropolis of 10 million, where the taps produce only the sound of air instead of water. People are not just in bread lines. They are also pushing and shoving each other with cans in their hands to store water for their homes. The regime is bankrupt. While Parliament threatens to impeach its own government for failing to govern the country, the streets of Tehran are declaring the regime's collapse with chants of, "Shut it down! Shut it down!" Iran is not just experiencing an economic crisis, it is facing the greatest existential collapse in its history. There is no water, there is no money, there is no authority. To understand how it got to this point, we first need to look at what is happening on the ground, on the asphalt. On December 30th, Iran was forced to declare a state of emergency in the heart of the capital, amid a panic rarely seen in its history. Life officially came to a halt in provinces considered the nerve centers of the regime, such as Tehran, Alborz, and Qom. Government offices, universities, schools, and even the stock exchange, the very heartbeat of a nation, all shut down. They showed the only reflex you have when you lose the ability to govern a state. They locked the country's doors. But it wasn't just the doors that were locked. It was the state's authority. Footage published on social media and verified by us proves that the balance of power on the streets has completely shifted. In streets that have been ruled for years with an iron fist by besieged militias and revolutionary guards, protesters are no longer running away. On the contrary, they are sitting in front of security forces, blocking roads, and it is the police who are seen retreating when they intervene. The biggest mystery at this moment, when the chain of command has broken down, is at the top. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has been missing for the last 3 days since the crisis erupted. The regime is headless, the police are fleeing, and chaos is growing. The technical detail that ignited this chaos is hidden in mathematics. The Iranian currency, the rial, is not in free fall, it has virtually vaporized. 1 gram of gold, just a tiny piece of metal, is currently worth exactly $140 in Tehran. Meanwhile, the official minimum wage earned by a worker in Iran, who labors from the early morning until late at night, is only $110. Mathematics does not lie, and this math spells the bankruptcy of a nation. People's salaries are no longer enough to live on for a month, or even to buy a single gram of gold. The events that began on December 28, 2025, grew rapidly. Protests continue intensely on their 4th day. With the black market rate of $1 exceeding 145,000 Tomans, or 1.45 million rials, the shutters came down in the Grand Bazaar, considered the heart of Tehran. For those who understand Iranian politics, this is not just an ordinary strike. It is the final nail in the coffin of the regime. This currency devaluation has sent import prices soaring. Inflation is at 42 to 52%. And food prices have risen by over 66% in a year. Merchants cannot buy or sell goods, they are suffering losses. That is why shopkeepers in Tehran's historic Grand Bazaar have gone on strike. Shutters have come down, and areas such as Aladdin, Charsu, and Lalezar have also been closed. The protest started out as economic, but quickly turned into political slogans. Freedom, end dictatorship, and so on. The protests spread from Tehran to cities like Isfahan, Shiraz, Mashhad, and Kermanshah. University students also joined in. The anger we see in videos circulating on social media is not ideological opposition. It is a biological reflex. Hunger knows no ideology. The cries of Tehran University students, "I would die for my country, but we need to change this situation," are the clearest proof that the knife is at the bone. The famous shopkeepers who overthrew the Shah in the 1979 revolution are now marching against the mullahs with the slogan, "Close it down, close it down." The domino effect is spreading from Tehran across the entire country. This is not a capital city problem, but a system problem. The shopkeepers closing their shutters has completely severed the supply chain. Trade between Tehran's warehouses and other cities has come to a halt. What does this mean? It means that when you go to the grocery store tomorrow, you won't find rice on the shelves. It means you won't find medicine. Iran is a country dependent on imports for basic food and medicine. No currency means no imports. No imports means empty shelves. And when the shelves are empty, the streets fill up. The cracks within the regime's security apparatus are also growing with this ripple effect. What you see on your screens right now, the police officers retreating, fleeing, they are also children of this people. They too are struggling with the same inflation and the same rent hikes. Economic data may remain on paper, but what you encounter when you take to the streets is a pure struggle for survival. Iran is losing not only its currency, but also the basic necessities of life, water and food. The crisis unfolding in Tehran goes far beyond a stock market chart. It is a medieval simulation where a mother cannot give her child water and a father cannot bring bread home. The unrest that began with the water crisis is now turning into uncontrolled riots in bread lines. Government officials are appearing on screens suggesting buying water as a solution. But the question is very simple and painful. With what money? In a country where oil revenues in the coffers have been depleted and foreign currency cannot even be found on the black market, importing water is nothing more than a fantasy. This state of scarcity has shattered the social contract. The tacit agreement between the Iranian people and the regime has been torn up. People have realized that the state cannot protect them or even feed them. This is the most dangerous moment for a regime because the wall of fear has collided with the wall of hunger and collapsed. This fire in the streets has finally ignited the thick curtains of the palace, and a full-blown political cannibalism has begun inside. The regime is now devouring itself. Central Bank Governor Mohammad Reza Farzin resigned. President Pezeshkian called for dialogue, but the crackdown continues. Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bakir Kalibaf appeared before cameras and openly and harshly threatened his own president, Masoud Pezeshkian. If you can't stop prices, we will remove you from office. This is a declaration of civil war within the regime. Why now? Because there is no money in the coffers. Top state officials have admitted that $6.7 billion that the oil ministry was supposed to bring into the country is missing. The money is simply gone. As lawmakers accuse each other of theft, state authority has collapsed. Oil revenues have been completely depleted in the first 8 months of the year, and the government is forced to loot the National Development Fund to pay civil servant salaries. The government is being forced to resign. Pezeshkian is cornered. The regime has lost its legitimacy under the economic wreckage. This picture shows us not a state crisis, but a state bankruptcy. On one side, the dollar exchange rate has skyrocketed to 1.44 million rials. On the other, billions of dollars in oil revenue have been lost. Iran is rotten not only economically, but also morally and administratively. And this decay can no longer be hidden. From Shush Bazaar to Aladdin shopping center, it echoes everywhere with the sound of shutters closing. So, how long can a police officer, whose salary has melted away and who cannot bring bread home, swing his baton at his own neighbors, his own merchants? The regime's greatest fear is not the number of protesters, it is the security forces reaching the point of insubordination. And signals from the field indicate that this point is not far off. The warnings made by members of parliament saying, "I seek refuge in God from the wrath of the people," are actually an admission of their own fears. This ripple effect has hit not only the streets, but also industry. Iran's industrial production has effectively halted due to energy crises and a lack of raw materials. And here, the story goes beyond being just a tragedy for the Iranian people and becomes a global security issue. Because those factories don't just produce refrigerators or cars. Those factories produce the death machines raining down on civilians in Ukraine, the Shahed drones. The chaos in Tehran is the biggest blow to Moscow's supply chain. So, while the Iranian regime discusses evacuating its own capital, with no electricity in its own factories, how will it provide Russia with uninterrupted ammunition? The answer is simple. It won't. The collapse at home will wipe out the military projection abroad. Now, let's pull the camera back a bit from the streets of Tehran and see what this fire means on the global chessboard. So why is this chaos in Tehran setting off panic alarms in Moscow? Because the cheap Shahed drones that Vladimir Putin relied on to strike Ukraine, marketed as a game changer, are produced in this very country with its collapsing economy, power-cut industrial zones, and striking workers. For Russia, the equation is very simple and frightening. If the economy in Iran stops, industrial production stops. If the government falls or a civil war breaks out, the logistics lines are cut. History has taught us this. Failed states cannot send weapons to their allies. They only send refugees. Putin's ammunition depot is currently in flames. The Russian army uses hundreds of drones every day on the Ukrainian front, and the flow of these drones is tied to the stability of the regime in Iran by a thread. The Iranian regime is trapped, and inside this trap is Vladimir Putin, who has tied his fate to the mullahs. Moscow, already struggling in the Ukrainian quagmire, now faces the risk of losing its most loyal supplier. This is a strategic checkmate position for the Kremlin. What about the other major allies? As Iran burns, why have Tehran's most trusted Eastern Bloc allies, especially China, fallen silent? This is where the great betrayal comes into play. China is profiting massively from this crisis by buying Iranian oil at prices far below market value, almost for free. Beijing is not investing a single yuan in Iran's collapsing infrastructure or its parched cities. For them, Iran is not a strategic partner, but merely a cheap gas station to be exploited. While Tehran believes it has established an axis of resistance against the West, it has actually been transformed into a cheap resource depot, exploited to the bone by its allies. China and Russia aren't lifting a finger to stop Tehran's collapse. They're just looking to see what they can salvage from the burning building. And the storm on the horizon. US President Donald Trump's maximum pressure policy is returning. But Iran is not prepared for this storm this time. On the contrary, it is caught at the most vulnerable, most impoverished, and most ungovernable moment in its history. There is no money in the coffers, the people are in the streets, and the government is in disarray. There may not even be a need for external intervention from Washington or Israel, because the regime is imploding under its own weight, its own internal contradictions. Israel's airstrikes in June and the subsequent US attacks have already cracked the fragile structure. Now those cracks are turning into massive fissures. Another dimension of this collapse is ecological and demographic disaster. The salt storms rising from Lake Urmia are not only burning the lungs of Iranians, they are pushing millions of potential refugees to the Turkish border, i.e., to NATO's doorstep. This is not an environmental crisis, it is a security crisis. As the regime drowns in the salt desert it created, it is also destabilizing the region. But this time, this instability will not be enough to save Tehran. Because the external enemy card no longer works on a father who cannot bring bread home. As a result, the bazaar that overthrew the Shah is now targeting the mullahs. History is not repeating itself. History is demanding accountability. The clock is ticking toward midnight in Tehran, and this time, there is no turning back. The bells signaling game over for the Iranian regime are ringing not from Washington, but from Tehran's narrow, angry streets. The lights that went out and the shutters that came down that night signify not just a strike, but the end of an era. And this end will leave not only Tehran, but Moscow in darkness. Because when the munitions factory burns, the war at the front is over. The regime is devastated, the economy is gone, and the people are no longer afraid. After all, what goes around, comes around. So, what are your thoughts on this? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay updated on new videos,